Welcome to Twisted Roots, where family stories are told the way they truly are, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. If you've ever been moved by the power of a parent's sacrifice or shaken by the pain of betrayal, this is the place for you. Subscribe now and join us in uncovering the hidden truths of family ties, because every story here carries a lesson and sometimes a warning. Tonight's story is titled, "They Wanted My Inheritance, So They Tried to Push Me Out, But I Had the Last Word." And it begins like so many family tragedies do, not with thunder, but with silence, not with a shout, but with a whisper. The old man sat by his window, watching the rain slide down the glass in slow, uneven trails. Outside, the world smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves, the kind of scent that pulls memories out of hiding. He had given his life to his children, every calloused hand, every sleepless night, every dream he once held for himself. They were the reason he built the house board by board, the reason he worked double shifts fixing engines, the reason he stayed standing when his wife left this world too soon. Sacrifice was supposed to be repaid with gratitude, but gratitude, he discovered, is fragile. It bends, it breaks, sometimes it disappears altogether. As the rain tapped against the window, he felt the stillness of his home. It was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, when the air grows heavy, when even the birds seem to know something is about to change. He closed his eyes and the memories poured in. Birthdays he paid for but wasn't invited to. College tuitions he covered only to be forgotten. Cars he bought, homes he built, lives he quietly stitched together with his own two hands. And yet, somewhere along the way, his children stopped seeing sacrifice. They started seeing control. They stopped seeing love. They started seeing money. That night, the old man whispered to himself, almost as if speaking to his late wife, "I gave them everything, but it seems what I gave was never enough." The storm was coming. He could feel it, and in the quiet patter of the rain, he understood the children he once carried in his arms would soon try to push him out of the very life he built for them. But what they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that he too had been planning. This was not the end of his story. This was only the rain before the storm. Dinner used to be a sacred ritual in their house. Years ago, when the children were young, the table overflowed with chatter, stories from school, laughter over spilled milk, the kind of warmth that makes a house feel alive. Back then, the old man would return from work bone-tired, grease under his nails, but the sight of his children waiting at the table was enough to soften every ache. But now, the table was heavy with silence. The clinking of silverware was the only sound in the room. The roast chicken sat in the middle, untouched longer than usual, its steam rising into an air that felt strangely cold. His children, grown now, adults with polished clothes and sharper words, barely looked at him. Their eyes flicked to one another in glances they thought he couldn't see. He did see, he always saw. "So, Dad," his eldest son finally said, pushing the food around his plate, "have you thought about what comes next?" The old man looked up slowly. "What comes next?" he echoed, though deep down he knew exactly what his son meant. "You know, with the business, the house, everything, it's a lot for you to manage alone at your age." A daughter chimed in, her tone sugary but her eyes calculating. "We just want to make sure everything's taken care of, Dad, for your sake." The old man lowered his fork, resting it gently against the plate. "For his sake, no," he heard the emphasis they tried to hide. They weren't worried about his peace, they were worried about his possessions. The meal carried on, but the warmth was gone. Conversations circled not around memories or dreams, but around numbers, assets, and thinly veiled questions about the future. Every word felt like a thread being cut, one by one, from the fabric of family he had spent decades weaving. He tried to speak of other things, his garden, the coming spring, even an old story about their mother's favorite recipe, but each attempt fell flat, drowned in polite nods and eyes drifting back to their phones. For the first time in his own home, he felt like a guest. Later that night, as the dishes sat unwashed in the sink, he lingered at the empty table. He could still hear echoes of laughter from years gone by, when his children were small and love had not yet been measured in dollars. The memory pressed against his chest like a weight. "They don't see me anymore," he whispered to the quiet room. "Only what I own." It was at that dinner table, under the hum of a dim light bulb and the weight of unspoken greed, that the truth began to take root. The people he loved most were beginning to plan a life without him, while he was still sitting right there across from them. And though the rain outside had eased, inside the house, the storm was only just gathering strength. It didn't happen all at once. Insults never do. They arrive in fragments, slip between sentences, cloaked as jokes, until one day they stand naked in the middle of the room, impossible to ignore. For the old man, that moment came on a Sunday evening. The family had gathered again, though not out of love, but out of duty. The dining room felt less like a home and more like a courtroom. His children, 3 of them, sat around the table with coffee mugs in hand. Voices sharp with impatience. His youngest, always the boldest, leaned forward. "Dad, why do you still dress like that? That flannel shirt, those old boots. You look like some broke mechanic." The words cut deeper than she knew. For decades, those very boots had carried him through long shifts at the garage, through winters when he worked 12 hours just to put food on the same table. He tried to laugh it off. "These clothes have served me well. They've built this life." But the eldest son sneered. "Built what exactly? A small town house? A few shops? Come on, Dad, times have changed. You're still living like it's the 1980s. People look at us and think we're cheap." The old man set his cup down carefully, though his hand trembled. Cheap. He remembered the nights he skipped meals so they could eat better. The vacations he never took so they could travel. Cheap was never the word. Sacrifice was. The middle daughter sighed, pushing her hair back with annoyance. "We're just saying maybe if you'd been more ambitious, we wouldn't feel so embarrassed." Embarrassed, that word landed like a hammer blow. The old man looked at the faces he once kissed goodnight, the mouths he once fed, and saw strangers staring back. Their eyes didn't hold love, they held judgment, as if they had already condemned him. For a long moment he said nothing. Silence was the only shield he had left, but inside something cracked. "Embarrassed," he finally said, his voice low, steady. "Everything you have, your schools, your cars, your clothes, came from these hands you mock, from this very shirt you laugh at. You call it old, I call it proof." The room fell quiet, but not out of shame. Instead, the silence felt like defiance, the kind children use when they've already decided they're right. One of them whispered, almost too soft to catch, "Maybe if you had more, Dad. We wouldn't be stuck waiting for what comes after you're gone." That was the sharpest cut of all. They weren't waiting for his guidance, his stories, or even his love. They were waiting for his death. The old man rose from the table slowly, every movement heavy with years of labor and disappointment. He looked at them each in turn, and what he saw was not hunger for food, but hunger for inheritance. "If you are ashamed of me," he said quietly, "then you are ashamed of the very life that built you, and I will not apologize for that." He left the table. But the words stayed behind, hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. For the children, it was just another argument. For the old man, it was the moment he finally understood. Love had been replaced by greed, and respect had been swallowed whole by ambition. And though he walked away, their cutting words followed him into the night, echoing louder than any storm outside. The old man thought the evening of insults would pass like a bad storm. Families argue, he told himself. Words can be cruel in the heat of the moment, but surely they didn't mean them. Surely blood still mattered, but families, when fractured, often hold secret meetings in shadows. It was a Tuesday when he heard them, not directly but through the thin walls of the house he had built with his own hands. Voices carried, whispered at first, then sharper, louder, careless in their arrogance. "He's getting old," the eldest son muttered. "The shops, the house, all that land, it's wasted in his hands. He can't even keep up anymore." The daughter responded, her tone icy. "If we wait too long, things might slip away. The businesses could collapse before we get them. We need to take control now." The youngest laughed, bitter and impatient. "Control? You mean inheritance. Let's call it what it is. Why should we keep waiting for him to?" The sentence trailed off. But the silence said the words he didn't dare finish. For a long moment, the old man stood frozen on the other side of the wall. His heart thudded against his ribs, each beat a painful reminder that the children he raised were not planning for his future, they were plotting for his absence. "He's stubborn," the eldest went on. "He'll never just hand it over. We need a plan, maybe convince him to sign papers, or make him feel like he can't handle things anymore. If he resists, well, there are ways to push him aside." A pause followed, heavy and chilling. The kind of pause when people consider just how far they're willing to go. "You're talking about Dad," one of them whispered, but the tone carried no love, only calculation. "This isn't about him anymore, this is about us." The old man pressed his hand against the wall as if the wood itself could hold him steady. His chest ached, not from age, but from betrayal. These were his children, the same children he once held in trembling arms at the hospital. the same ones he'd worked himself half to death to support. And now they spoke of him as though he were already gone. He backed away slowly, afraid the floorboards might betray his eavesdropping. Alone in his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the calluses on his hands, hands that had built everything, hands that had fed them, clothed them, carried them. A plan. He whispered to the empty air, "My children are making a plan against me." The rain had stopped outside, but in his heart, a storm raged louder than ever. It was no longer just silence at the dinner table, no longer cruel words flung in frustration. This was intent. This was greed, organized and sharpened like a knife. And as the old man sat there, he realized something bitter and undeniable. If they had a plan, then he would need one too. Because sometimes the only way to protect what you've built is to fight the very people you built it for. The old man had always believed that betrayal, when it came, would be loud. He thought it would arrive with shouting, slammed doors, maybe even fists on a table. But when betrayal is born inside a family, it is quiet or colder. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and whispers are harder to forget. That night, after hearing their secret meeting through the walls, he did not sleep. He lay awake in the dark, his body still but his mind racing. Every word replayed in his ears. We need to take control now, convince him, push him aside. They had spoken about him like he was a piece of furniture in the house, useful once, but now just taking up space. As the hours passed, he thought of his late wife. He imagined her voice, calm and steady, the way it used to guide him when life pressed too hard. "You must face things, William," she would say. "Running from the truth never saves anyone." By morning, knew what he had to do. At breakfast, the house felt staged. Children too polite, smiles too sharp, their voices just a little too measured. They thought he hadn't heard. They thought the old man was too weary, too naive, too blind to notice. But age, he knew, was not blindness. Age was a teacher, and he had learned how to see through masks. He set down his coffee cup and looked at them one by one. His voice was steady, though his chest ached. "Last night," he began. "I heard you." The room froze. Forks hovered above plates. A single drop of orange juice slid down the side of a glass, the only movement in the silence. "I heard you talking about me, about my house, about my shops, about my death even." His eyes, once soft with paternal love, hardened with something new. Disappointment, wound, a soldier's resolve. The eldest son tried to recover. "Dad, you misunderstood." "No," the old man cut in. Sharper than they'd ever heard him. "I didn't misunderstand. I raised you. I know the sound of my children's voices when they are lying and when they are scheming." The youngest shifted in his seat, eyes darting away. The daughter tried to smile, but the smile crumbled under the weight of her father's stare. "Do you know what it feels like?" he continued, his voice breaking now, "to hear your own children talk about your life as if it were nothing more than a bank account? To hear them count the years I might have left like coins in a jar." No one answered. "I worked for you. I bled for you. Every callus, every scar on these hands was for you. And now you stand there and tell each other I am nothing but an obstacle, an old man to be pushed aside." His hands trembled on the table, not with weakness, but with the effort of holding back everything inside him, the anger, the heartbreak, the temptation to shout until the walls shook. But he didn't shout. He let silence do the work. Silence that made his children squirm in their chairs, silence that turned their greed into shame, at least for a fleeting moment. Finally, he rose, his chair scraping against the floor. "If you truly believe I am a burden," he said, his voice low but firm, "then you will get what you want sooner than you think. But remember this, the things you hunger for most, my money, my home, my shops, may not belong to you when that day comes." He left them at the table, their mouths half open, their lies half formed. Upstairs, in the solitude of his room, he sat at his desk and opened the drawer where the legal papers rested. He had not signed them yet, but now he knew someday soon he would, because betrayal had a sound. He had heard it, and once a father hears that sound from his children, nothing is ever the same again. The old man sat alone at his desk, the papers spread before him like a battlefield he never asked to fight. But his eyes weren't on the ink or the signatures. They drifted to the past, to a reel of memories that no one else in that house seemed to remember anymore. He remembered the nights, endless nights, when the shop lights burned long after midnight, when his hands were black with grease and his stomach growled from meals skipped. He'd worked 18-hour days not because he wanted riches, but because his children needed shoes, needed books, needed a chance at something better. He remembered his wife's final breath, the way she gripped his hand and whispered, "Take care of them, Will, promise me." And he had promised, God help him, he had promised with every fiber of his soul. He remembered birthdays, cheap cakes bought with borrowed dollars, balloons tied to the back of a pickup truck because that's all he could afford. Yet his children's laughter back then had made him feel like the richest man alive. He remembered the first tuition check, his signature shaky not from doubt but from exhaustion. $40,000 a year, money he didn't have but somehow found. He wanted them to walk into classrooms with pride, not shame. He remembered graduation day, standing off to the side as his son took the stage. No one clapped louder than him. No one, and when his boy asked for a car, he gave him one brand new, though it meant draining nearly every account he had. He remembered every yes he had spoken when he should have said no. Every rescue, every bailout, every time he caught them when they stumbled instead of letting them fall. He had thought love was protection. He had thought sacrifice would be enough. But as the memories washed over him, he realized something bitter. Every sacrifice had been forgotten. Each one had vanished into the air like smoke, leaving behind only expectation. What once felt like gifts of love had somehow become debts in their eyes. His children had stopped seeing the long nights. They had stopped remembering the empty plates he endured so theirs could be full. They saw only what they did not have yet, his inheritance, his end. The old man closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he let the tears fall freely. Not because of the money or the betrayal, but because he understood the cruelest truth of all. He had built a life for his children, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And in doing so, he had built walls between them too, walls of entitlement, walls of dependence, walls that love could no longer climb. He whispered into the empty room as if to his late wife, I gave them everything, and in giving everything, maybe I gave them nothing at all. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, a day that once meant family. The old man had set the table the way his wife used to, plates neatly aligned, a roast slowly cooking in the oven, the faint smell of rosemary filling the house. He had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that food might soften the distance between them, that sharing a meal might remind them of who they once were. But when his children arrived, the air carried no warmth. Their footsteps echoed through the house like strangers coming to claim a place that wasn't theirs. They sat not with the ease of family, but with the stiffness of shareholders waiting for a meeting to begin. The meal began quietly enough. Forks moved, spoons clinked, but no laughter came. And then, without warning, the eldest son put down his glass and leaned forward. Dad, he said, voice firm, cutting through the silence, I think it's time you stepped aside. The old man looked up. Startled, stepped aside. Yes, the son pressed, you've done enough, but now the businesses, the house, the money, you can't keep holding on to it all. It should be managed by us, by the next generation. The old man's fork hovered above his plate. For a moment he thought he had misheard, but the daughter chimed in, her words laced with impatience. He's right, Dad, look at you, you're tired, you're slowing down. What's the point of holding on to everything? Let us take over before it's too late. Too late for what? He asked quietly. The youngest laughed, but it wasn't the laugh of a child. It was cold, hollow, sharpened by greed. Too late for you, old man, let's be honest. You won't be here forever. Why drag it out? Why not hand it over now while you're still around to watch us succeed? The words struck harder than any blow. For decades he had dreamed of this moment, of passing on his life's work. His shops, his land, his home, but he had imagined it differently. He had imagined gratitude, not impatience, respect, not mockery, a moment of legacy, not a negotiation. His hands clenched beneath the table. He tried to steady his breath, but the storm inside him raged too fiercely. So that's how you see me, he said at last. Not as your father, not as the man who raised you, who kept this family alive. You see me as an obstacle. Something to move out of the way. Silence fell heavy over the table. None of them denied it. Their silence was an admission more brutal than words. The old man rose slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His eyes, wet with the tears he refused to shed, moved from face to face. If you are so eager to bury me while I still breathe, he said, his voice trembling yet unyielding, then listen well. I will not hand over my life's work because of your greed, not now, not ever. He left the table, the food untouched, the air poisoned. Behind him he heard whispers, arguments, recriminations. Applauding that grew bolder with every breath. But as he climbed the stairs, his heart pounding with grief, one truth carved itself deep into his soul. The betrayal was no longer hidden. It was open. and once spoken aloud, such betrayal can never be taken back. The house was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Quietness has many forms. Sometimes it comforts, wrapping the walls in warmth. But tonight it pressed down heavy, like a weight on the old man's chest. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words of his children echoing in his ears. "Step aside, you won't be here forever. Hand it over now." They had spoken as if he were already gone, as if the man who raised them, who bled for them, was nothing more than a shadow taking up space. The clock ticked on the nightstand. Each second was a drop of water against stone, carving away his resolve. He turned to the empty side of the bed, the space where his wife once lay. The pillow, untouched for years, still carried the faintest trace of her lavender perfume, though perhaps it was only memory playing tricks on him. "Sarah," he whispered into the darkness, "where did I go wrong?" Images of her came rushing back. Her smile in the morning light, the way she would place a gentle hand on his arm when his temper rose, the way she saw through people, their hearts, their motives, long before he did. She had warned him once, gently but firmly, "Don't give them everything, Will. Make them work for it, make them earn it. Otherwise, they won't understand its worth." He had brushed it off back then, thinking he was doing the right thing. He wanted their son to have the best schools, their daughters to have every opportunity. He wanted them to live without the hunger and fear he had known as a boy. But now, in the dark, he wondered if Sarah had seen the storm long before he did. If she had known that love, when expressed only through money, can twist into entitlement. He sat up, resting his elbows on his knees, his head heavy in his hands. The room felt too big, too empty. The silence was no longer just silence, it was loneliness. "I worked, Sarah." He whispered, "I worked until my body broke. I thought that was love, but maybe I was buying their affection. Maybe I raised them to need my wallet instead of my wisdom." A tear slipped down his cheek, though he wiped it away quickly, almost ashamed to cry in the empty room. He was a man who had survived harder nights than this. Nights of hunger, nights of grief, nights of war with his own doubts. But this night cut deeper because it wasn't the world outside trying to break him. It was the children he had raised inside these very walls. The old man rose and crossed the room to the dresser. On top sat a framed photo of Sarah holding their son when he was just a boy, her smile radiant, her eyes full of hope. He traced the glass with his thumb, his voice trembling. "I promised you I'd take care of them. I kept that promise, but look at them now. Look at what I've made." The weight of guilt pressed on him. He asked himself again and again, had he loved them wrongly? Had he mistaken sacrifice for guidance? Had he confused giving with raising? Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the branches against the window. He thought of it as Sarah's voice, reminding him that storms do not last forever, but they always leave scars. The sleepless night stretched on, and with it, a seed began to take root in his mind. A seed of resolve. If his children saw him only as a means to an inheritance, then perhaps the greatest lesson he could leave them would not be money at all. But for now, he sat in the dark, whispering to the ghost of his wife, his words carried away by the night. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I gave them everything, and maybe I lost them because of it." Morning came gray and heavy, as if the sky itself shared in his sleepless grief. The old man rose from his bed with shoulders slumped, each step echoing through the empty halls like reminders of what had been lost. His children were still under his roof, yet he had never felt lonelier. By noon he found himself walking the familiar streets of town, past the old bakery, the church where Sarah's funeral had been held, and finally, toward a small brick office with brass letters on the door, Harper and Jameson, attorneys at law. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust, and behind the desk sat Jameson, his oldest friend. They had served in the Navy together once, two young men who had thought themselves unbreakable. Time had bent Jameson's back, but his eyes were still sharp. "Will," Jameson said, standing slowly, "you look like hell." The old man managed a hollow laugh. "Feels about right." He lowered himself into the chair opposite, his hands heavy on his knees. "It's the kids, Jameson, they've changed." For an hour the words poured out, the whispers he overheard, the cutting remarks at the table, the open betrayal. Jameson listened quietly, the way only an old friend could, without judgment, without interruption. Finally, when the old man's voice broke into silence, Jameson leaned forward. "Will, you gave them everything. You built their lives with your own hands, but somewhere along the way they stopped seeing the sacrifice and started seeing entitlement. That's not your failure alone, that's the poison of comfort. Too much comfort breeds greed." The old man lowered his head. I promised Sarah I'd take care of them, but maybe I took care of them too much. Maybe I ruined them. Jameson shook his head firmly. You didn't ruin them. Life gives each person choices. They chose greed. But you still have one choice left. And what choice is that? Jameson's eyes darkened, his voice firm. Protect what you've built. Teach them the lesson they refuse to learn. You need to prepare will, sign the papers, write the will. Make sure that when they try to push you out, they find themselves standing with nothing but their own reflection. The old man stared at the worn carpet beneath his boots. He had thought of this before in fragments. But hearing Jameson say it aloud gave it weight. It felt like betrayal to even consider cutting his children out. And yet, hadn't they already betrayed him first? I don't want revenge, he whispered. I want them to understand. Then make sure they do, Jameson replied. When love is ignored, sometimes the only teacher left is consequence. Protect your estate, direct it somewhere their greed cannot touch. Maybe one day they'll realize what they lost. The office grew quiet. Outside, the drizzle tapped gently against the windows, echoing the rhythm of his own heart. The old man rose slowly, gripping his friend's hand with the strength of a soldier. All right, he said. I'll prepare. If they want a game of inheritance, then I'll play the last move myself. As he stepped back into the cold afternoon, the weight on his chest had not lifted, but it had shifted. It was no longer the weight of despair, it was the weight of resolve. For the first time in years, he felt something steady beneath his grief, a plan. And though his children did not know it yet, the father they thought weak and tired had just taken his first step toward the last word. The decision did not come easily. No father wakes one morning and says, I will cut my children out of my life. But betrayal has a way of hardening the heart, of forcing choices no parent ever dreams of making. A week after his talk with Jameson, the old man found himself walking once again down that quiet brick street. This time he wasn't there for counsel, he was there to act. The office smelled of ink and parchment, the air heavy with the gravity of choices made inside its walls. Jameson greeted him with a nod, no questions asked. The old man appreciated that. Some decisions are too heavy to be spoken of twice. They sat together at the wide oak desk, papers neatly stacked before them. Are you sure about this, Will? Jameson asked gently, his hand resting on the folder. The old man stared at the words printed in black ink, Last Will and Testament. The title itself felt like a tombstone. He closed his eyes for a moment and saw the faces of his children, not as they were now, sharp and cold, but as they had been long ago, laughing in the yard, sticky with melted ice cream, calling him daddy with voices full of trust. His chest tightened. For a second he almost faltered. But then he heard their recent voices again, their cutting words, their plodding whispers. The cruel way they had spoken of his life as though it were already over, that memory steeled him. Yes, he said at last, it's time. Jameson slid the documents forward. Together they reviewed every detail, line by line, clause by clause, and with each passage the plan became clear. Not a cent, not a brick, not a single tool from the shop would fall into greedy hands. Instead, the wealth he had built through decades of sacrifice would flow elsewhere, to veterans who, like him, had returned from service with scars no one could see, to wildlife conservation because Sarah had always loved the open fields and forests, and to a scholarship fund bearing her name so that children who carried hunger in their eyes, like he once had, could know the gift of education. The pen felt heavy in his hand, heavier than any wrench he had ever held. He paused, his breath uneven, and whispered under his breath, Forgive me, Sarah, this isn't what we dreamed. But maybe it's the only way left to teach them. And then, with a slow, deliberate stroke, he signed his name. The scratch of the pen on paper echoed in the quiet office like a verdict. It was done. Jameson placed the papers into a sealed envelope, his face solemn. It's official now. If anything happens to you, they'll get nothing. The old man nodded, his throat too tight for words. Nothing, that was the price of betrayal. As he stepped out of the office, the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds. The light fell across his weathered face, and for the first time in many weeks he felt something like peace. He knew a storm was still coming. His children would push harder. They would grow bolder, they might even try to force his hand. But when that day came, when they thought they had cornered him, he would already be holding the final move. The will was his secret. The inheritance was no longer theirs, and fate had begun to turn. It started with small things, disrespect disguised as casual remarks, decisions made without asking, voices that grew sharper and sharper in his own home. the kind of erosion you almost don't notice until the walls begin to crumble. The eldest son had begun showing up at the auto shop uninvited, striding in as if he owned the place. He gave orders to the younger mechanics, barked instructions he barely understood. When his father corrected him gently, he snapped back. "Dad, times have changed. You don't get how business works anymore. Let me handle it. Handle it." As though decades of sweat, of oil-stained nights and sunburned days could be dismissed by a single careless phrase. At home, the daughter had begun rearranging things without asking, clearing out cabinets, boxing up old photographs, speaking of modernizing the house. She had even walked into his study once, eyeing the desk where his legal papers rested, and said with a laugh that wasn't really a laugh, "All this paperwork is going to be ours someday anyway. Might as well start cleaning it up." The youngest was the boldest. He no longer knocked before entering, no longer softened his tone. He raided the pantry, left messes in the living room, treated the house like a waiting inheritance rather than a home. One evening, after a heated discussion about bills, he said flatly, "Why are you still clinging to control, old man? You've done your part, step aside and let us take over." Those words landed heavier than any insult before. The old man listened, his face still, his voice calm, but inside his chest a storm was brewing. He knew something they did not. He knew that with every act of arrogance, every sneer, every careless assumption, they were digging their own graves. But the cruelty did not stop. At a family gathering, the eldest son raised a toast not to his father, but to the next chapter. When the torch is finally passed, the others clinked glasses, smiling as if he were already gone. The old man sat silently, his weathered hands folded in his lap, feeling the distance between them stretch wider with each hollow laugh. And yet beneath the sorrow there was a flicker of something else, resolve. They thought they were close to victory, that the empire he built was slipping into their hands, but he had already sealed his will, already written the future they could not see. As he left the table that night, their laughter ringing behind him, he whispered to himself, "Keep laughing, children. The day will come when you realize what you never earned can never be yours." The tension in the house was no longer hidden. It was alive, humming in every room, a living reminder that the battle lines had been drawn. And for the first time, the old man no longer felt like prey. He felt like a soldier again, waiting for the right moment to strike, not with fists. Not with anger, but with the quiet power of truth and law. It began with papers. Always in the end it comes down to papers. One evening, as the old man sat quietly in his study, his eldest son appeared at the door holding a slim folder. His voice was casual, but his eyes betrayed urgency. "Dad," he said, sliding the folder onto the desk, "just some documents we need you to sign. Standard things, power of attorney, transfer of management. It'll make everything easier for you, less stress." The old man glanced down at the papers. Legal terms marched across the page like soldiers, precise and merciless. He didn't need to read them all to understand. If he signed, he would hand them everything, his shops, his accounts, his home. He set the pen aside, his voice steady. "I built this with my own hands. Why should I sign it away?" The son's smile thinned. "Because you're not capable of handling it anymore. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. The word lingered, harder than raising them alone after their mother died. Harder than working until his back nearly broke. No, this was harder because this was betrayal from the very blood he had given life to. The next day the daughter came. She spoke softly, her words wrapped in sweetness, but the intent was the same. "Dad, this house is too big for you now. It's lonely here. We've been looking at assisted living communities. They take care of you. We could handle everything else." Everything else, he repeated quietly. He knew what everything else meant, his home, his land, the only place that still carried Sarah's laughter in its walls. When he refused, her smile cracked, and for the first time he saw the steel beneath the sugar. "Don't be selfish. You don't need all this anymore." And then came the youngest, the one with no patience left. He didn't bother with persuasion. He stood in the living room, voice raised, fists clenched. "Enough, old man. Stop clinging to what's already ours. You're just dragging things out. Sign the damn papers or get out of the way." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The old man's heart pounded in his chest. For years he had endured their subtle jabs, their whispered plans, their veiled insults. But now it was out in the open. They wanted him gone, not tomorrow, not someday, now. He looked at each of them, his children, his flesh and blood, and saw not family but strangers standing in his own home, circling him like vultures. "You want me gone so badly?" He asked, his voice low, trembling with both sorrow and fury. "Then tell me to my face, say it plain. The room went silent. None of them spoke, but their eyes said everything. He turned away, his shoulders heavy but his spirit hardening. Upstairs, in the quiet of his room, he opened the drawer where Jameson's envelope lay. His hand lingered on it, and for the first time a strange calm settled over him. They thought they were winning. They thought they had cornered him. Weakened him, stripped him of choices. But he knew something they did not. The will was already signed, the future already decided. Their plot to push him out would soon become the stage for their own downfall. It was late evening when the storm finally broke. Rain hammered the windows, the wind howled through the trees, and inside the old house, the house he had built with his bare hands, the storm inside his family reached its peak. The argument had started like all the others, voices raised about bills, about business, about the future. But this time there was no disguise. The words came sharp, unfiltered, cruel. The youngest slammed his fist on the table. Enough already, you're stubborn. You're selfish and you're dragging this family down with you. The daughter joined in, her voice cutting like glass. You don't belong here anymore, Dad. You're just in the way. We can't live our lives waiting for you to finally let go. The eldest, once the quiet one, delivered the final blow. He pointed toward the door, his face hard. Maybe it's time you left. This house, this business, it's ours now. You should just go. The words struck harder than the storm outside. For a long moment the old man stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest. His children, the ones he had raised through hunger and grief, the ones he had carried on his shoulders, the ones he had sacrificed everything for, were no longer whispering about his absence. They were demanding it. He looked around the room, searching their faces for even a flicker of love, of hesitation, of guilt. But he found none, only impatience, only greed. Only strangers wearing the faces of his children. Slowly he turned toward the door. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. This house was built board by board, nail by nail, by these hands. I carried you through its doors when you were too small to walk, and now you tell me I no longer belong here. No one answered. The silence was worse than words. He reached for his coat, his fingers trembling. The familiar fabric felt heavier than ever before. As he opened the door, the storm rushed in, cold rain slapping his face, wind clawing at his frail body. He stepped outside, and behind him the door closed with a dull, final thud. The rain soaked through his coat within seconds, chilling him to the bone. He walked down the porch steps slowly, each step echoing with the weight of memories. He could still see Sarah planting flowers in the front yard, could still hear his children laughing as they played catch in the driveway. Those echoes now felt like ghosts, fading with every drop of rain. He reached the edge of the street and stopped, his heart breaking in silence. Above him, lightning split the sky. Below him, water pooled around his worn boots. For the first time in his life, he felt not like a father, not like a provider, but like a man utterly alone. Sarah, he whispered into the storm, his voice swallowed by the rain. I kept my promise. I gave them everything, and still it wasn't enough. The tears on his face mingled with the rain. Indistinguishable, unseen. He turned away from the house, not just from wood and brick, but from the life he had built, from the family that no longer wanted him. With every step into the storm, the weight in his chest grew heavier. His heart was breaking, not because he had lost a house, but because he had lost the very people for whom he built it. And yet, somewhere beneath the grief, a small ember of resolve still glowed. They thought they had cast him out, stripped him of everything, but what they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that the final word was already his. The rain fell harder, the night grew darker, and the old man walked on, carrying with him nothing but sorrow and a secret that would one day shatter their greed. The rain did not stop that night. It followed him down the road, soaking his clothes, clinging to his skin until he felt more ghost than man. Each step was heavy, not from the water, but from the weight in his chest. The house behind him, the house he had built nail by nail, was no longer his. His children had taken that from him with words sharper than any blade. By midnight, his legs trembled with exhaustion. The town was a few miles away. But he had no strength left to make it that far. His boots sloshed through puddles until finally he saw a light in the distance, a porch lamp glowing through the storm. It belonged to Oliver Reed, a neighbor and friend from long ago. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, life having carried them in different directions. But the bond of old friendships, like the roots of ancient trees, runs deeper than time. When Oliver opened the door, surprise flashed across his weathered face, quickly replaced by concern. "Will, good Lord, you're drenched. What happened?" The old man stood there, silent at first, water dripping from his coat. Then with a voice cracked by both rain and sorrow, he answered, "They've turned me out, Oliver, my own children." Oliver said nothing. Instead, he reached out, strong and steady, pulling his friend inside. A blanket was thrown over his shoulders, a steaming mug pressed into his hands. The warmth stung not his skin, but his heart. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the old man spoke. He told Oliver everything, the whispered plans, the cruel words, the demand to sign away his life, the storm that drove him out of his own home. Oliver listened quietly, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening with each word. When the story ended, silence hung heavy. Then Oliver leaned forward, his voice firm. "Will, listen to me. You've spent your life giving, too much giving. And now they think they can take the rest, but you still have more strength than you know. You can rebuild, not the house of wood and nails. You already built that. I mean the house inside you, the man you are." The old man shook his head, tears pooling in his eyes. "I don't know if I have it in me anymore." Oliver placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you do. You survived wars, loss, hunger. You survived burying Sarah. This betrayal hurts deeper, I know. But you're not done yet. Sometimes, Will, the only way to rebuild is to start by tearing down the old walls. You already did that tonight when you walked out." For the first time in weeks, the old man felt something stir in his chest. Not joy, not yet, but the faintest ember of resolve. That night, as he lay on Oliver's couch wrapped in borrowed blankets, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "They took my house, but they haven't taken me, and they will not take the last word." The storm outside began to ease, rain softening into a drizzle, and in the quiet of a friend's home, the father who had been cast out began, slowly, to rebuild, not the home of bricks and timber, but the house of his own spirit. He had lost much, but he had not lost everything. And from the ashes of betrayal, a plan stronger than their greed was already taking shape. The family gathered in the old dining room as if they already owned it. The chandelier above flickered with a pale light, casting shadows across the table where the children now sat like rulers presiding over their new kingdom. Stacks of papers lay open, accounts, property deeds, contracts waiting for signatures. Their voices overlapped, confident and triumphant. "Once Dad's out of the way, we can finally expand the business," the eldest said, tapping the table with a pen. "The house will sell for a fortune," the daughter added, her eyes gleaming. The youngest leaned back in his chair, smug. "About time we stopped dragging our feet. The old man should have stepped aside years ago." They spoke of him as if he were already gone, as if he were a chapter closed. None of them noticed the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. The door creaked open, and there he was. The old man stepped inside slowly, leaning lightly on his cane. The room fell silent, shock freezing every face. He was supposed to be gone, discarded like an old coat left in the rain. Yet here he stood, not broken, not angry, but calm. His coat was dry, his posture steady, his eyes carrying a quiet strength they had not seen in years. And then the most disarming thing of all, he smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile, nor the weak smile of a man begging for place. It was the serene, steady smile of someone who knew a truth hidden from everyone else. "You're having a meeting," he said softly, his voice carrying through the room like the echo of an old hymn. "Don't let me interrupt." The children shifted uncomfortably. The eldest cleared his throat. "Dad, we thought you were staying with someone." "I was," the old man nodded. "A good friend reminded me of something important, that I still have a voice, and that voice hasn't been silenced yet." The daughter leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You shouldn't be here." "We were handling things." The old man met her gaze, his smile never wavering. "Yes, I can see that. Handling things as if I were no longer part of them, as if I were already gone." The youngest scoffed. "What difference does it make? You left. You have no say anymore." But his words rang hollow against the father's quiet composure. For the first time, it was not the children who controlled the room, it was him. He walked to the head of the table. The place he had sat for decades, through birthdays and holidays, and dinners filled with laughter now long vanished. He rested his hands on the chair, but did not sit. "You believe you've taken everything from me," he said gently. "My home, my place at this table, even your respect, but there's something you don't understand." He paused, letting the silence tighten. "I was never afraid of losing things. What mattered to me was love, and when love is gone, what remains is simply wood and stone, paper and ink." The children shifted in their seats, unease spreading across their faces. There was something in his voice, in the way he stood unshaken, that unsettled them. He let his smile widen just slightly. You will understand soon enough. For now, carry on with your meeting. I just wanted you to know this story isn't finished yet." With that, he turned and walked out as calmly as he had entered, leaving behind a silence thicker than any storm. The children exchanged glances. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed their eyes. They had expected a broken man crawling back, begging. Instead, they had seen someone different, someone with a secret, someone holding the final card. And though none of them would admit it, a chill had settled in their bones. The day had come. The children gathered in the lawyer's office, smug confidence etched on their faces. They had dressed well for the occasion, as though preparing for a coronation. Their whispers filled the room about money, about investments, about finally having control. The eldest son leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "It's just a formality. Dad knows what's best for us. He'll sign it over." The daughter smirked. "He's too old to fight us anymore. We'll be managing everything before the month is over." The youngest, impatient as always, muttered, "The sooner the better. We wasted enough years waiting for him to step aside." Then the door opened. The old man entered, not timidly, but with the steady dignity of someone who had made peace with himself. He was not alone. Beside him walked Mr. Harris, his longtime attorney, a man known in town for his sharp mind and incorruptible honesty. The children straightened in their seats, their smirks faltered. The father greeted no one. He simply took his place at the head of the table, laid a worn leather folder on the desk, and looked at each of them in turn. "You have waited for this moment," he said calmly, "and I have too, but perhaps for very different reasons." Mr. Harris cleared his throat, unfolding the folder. "As executor of William Carter's estate, I will now read the official, legally binding last will and testament, signed and notarized 3 months ago." A ripple of confusion spread across the children's faces. 3 months ago, they had thought their father too frail, too weary to think of such things. The lawyer continued, his voice crisp, unwavering. "I, William Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament to my children." The three leaned forward, eager. "I leave my love, my memories, and the years of sacrifice that brought you to where you are today." The words struck like thunder. The eldest blinked, the daughter frowned, the youngest muttered, "What the hell does that mean?" The lawyer went on, "As for my house, my business, my land, and all financial holdings, these will not pass into the hands of my children. Instead, I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate to the Carter Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to funding scholarships for underprivileged students and supporting community projects for those in need." Silence. The daughter's face drained of color. "What? That's impossible." The eldest slammed his fist on the table. "This is fraud. He wouldn't do this to his own family." The lawyer's eyes flicked toward the father, then back to the children. "The documents bear his signature, witnessed, sealed, recorded with the county clerk's office. There is no fraud. The estate is untouchable." The youngest shot up from his chair, voice cracking with rage. "You can't do this. We're your blood, everything you have you built for us." At last the father spoke, his tone steady, almost tender. "No, I built it because I believed in love and family and giving you more than I ever had. But love cannot be bought and family cannot be forced. You cast me out of the house I built. You wanted my inheritance, not my heart, so I gave the only gift left that mattered to those who would value it, to strangers who will turn it into hope instead of greed." His words hung in the air like a verdict. The daughter's hands shook. The eldest turned red with fury, searching for something, anything to contest. But the lawyer slid the notarized will across the table, undeniable and final. The father leaned back, his calm smile returning. "You thought you had the last word, but it was mine all along." The silence that followed was deafening. No storm, no thunder could match the weight of that truth. The children, once so certain of victory, sat in stunned defeat, their dreams of wealth dissolving before their eyes. And in that moment, the old man reclaimed what they had tried to steal. Not his house, not his fortune, but his dignity. The lawyer's final words still echoed in the room, the weight of the will pressed down heavier than stone. For a moment silence reigned. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound, its steady rhythm mocking the chaos building inside their hearts. Then it began. "This can't be happening," the daughter gasped, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost, her perfectly manicured nails dug into the wooden table. "He wouldn't do this to us, he couldn't." The eldest, red-faced, Slammed his fist down. Of course he wouldn't. Somebody tricked him. You. He jabbed a finger toward his sister. You should have convinced him. You spent the most time with him after Mom passed. This is your fault. My fault. She snapped back, eyes blazing. You were supposed to be the responsible one, the one he trusted with business matters. What did you do? Sat back and assumed everything would fall into your lap. The youngest, pacing like a trapped animal, exploded. Both of you are useless. I told you we should have pressured him earlier, forced him to sign the transfer while we had the chance. But no, you kept waiting, playing it safe, and now look at us. Their voices rose, overlapping in a storm of accusation. What had once been their united front, the alliance to push their father aside, crumbled in an instant. Greed had tied them together, but greed unraveled them just as quickly. He's an old man. How could he outsmart all three of us? The eldest shouted, his voice cracking. Because you underestimated him, the daughter hissed. You always thought he was weak, but he was watching us every step. Shut up, the youngest barked. We're not done yet. We'll contest it in court. We'll prove he wasn't in his right mind. But Mr. Harris, the lawyer who had been silently gathering the documents, finally spoke with cool authority. You can try, he said evenly. But you will fail. The will was signed in front of 2 witnesses, certified by the county clerk and reaffirmed on record. Your father was clear, deliberate, and sound of mind. There is no court in this state that will overturn it. The words dropped like a gavel, final, absolute. The daughter's eyes filled with tears, not of grief, but of frustration. So we get nothing after everything we've done, nothing. The father, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His calm voice cut through their fury like a blade of truth. Not nothing, you still have each other. But if this night proves anything, perhaps even that is already gone. His words were not loud, but they echoed louder than their shouting. The siblings turned on one another once more, their anger twisting into blame, suspicion, and fear. The family that once schemed together now shattered under the very weight of their greed. The old man watched, not with triumph, but with sorrow. He had not wanted this ending, but it was the ending they had chosen, and as he rose from his chair, leaving them to their chaos, he carried with him the dignity they had tried to strip away, while they were left drowning in the ruins of their own making. The storm inside the lawyer's office still raged. Voices clashed, chairs scraped, accusations flew like arrows in the dark, but William Carter no longer listened. He stood quietly, his cane steady beneath his hand. He looked at each of his children one last time, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with the mournful calm of a man who had given everything and expected nothing more. Without a word, he turned toward the heavy oak doors. His footsteps were slow but unwavering, and as he reached for the handle, the sound of his children's quarreling faded behind him until it was nothing but a distant hum. The doors closed with a soft but final thud, and in that sound a chapter of his life ended. For years, that house, that family, that fortune had defined him. He had lived every day as a provider, a father, a man whose worth was measured by sacrifice. But now, for the first time, was free not of responsibility but of chains, the chains of expectations, of being seen only as a vessel of wealth. Stepping into the crisp evening air, he breathed deeply. The world outside was quiet, a contrast to the chaos he had left behind. The sky was painted with shades of fading gold, as though the day itself was closing its doors alongside him. Mr. Harris walked beside him for a moment. "Are you sure you're at peace with this?" the lawyer asked gently. The old man smiled faintly. "Peace does not come from keeping what others demand of you. It comes from giving what feels right. And tonight I finally gave something that mattered." The lawyer nodded, respecting the truth in his words. "They may never forgive you." William's eyes softened. "Perhaps, but forgiveness was never what I needed. What I needed was to stay true to who I am." They parted ways at the street corner, the lawyer tipping his hat before disappearing into the city's glow. The old man continued on alone, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement, yet he felt no loneliness. For the first time in years, his solitude was not a prison, but a companion. He passed by a small park where children laughed as they chased one another through the fading light. Their joy was untainted by money, by inheritance, by greed. Watching them, he felt something stir within him, a reminder of why he had chosen to give his estate to others. Not to wound his children, but to ensure that hope lived on, even if not through them. As he walked farther into the night, the sound of his children's voices, once the center of his world, grew distant, almost unreal. Behind him were closed doors, echoes of betrayal and greed. Ahead of him was an unwritten path, quiet and free, and with each step he carried not bitterness but a strange, liberating peace, the kind of peace only a man who had lost everything and still found himself could know. News travels faster than fire. It began with whispers among neighbors. The Carter children, once admired as the heirs of a respected family, had become the subject of hushed conversations over fences and in grocery store aisles. Words like greedy, ungrateful, and shameful passed from mouth to mouth. Then came the wider circle. Someone from the lawyer's office had spoken. A clerk at the county courthouse had confirmed the records, and soon enough, the story spilled onto social media. The headlines spread like wildfire. Elderly father disinherits children, donates entire estate to charity. Within hours, the internet took sides, and overwhelmingly it sided with the father. On Facebook, neighbors posted pictures of him fixing his own fence, mowing his lawn, helping at church events. This man gave everything to his kids, and they turned their backs on him. One post read, quickly amassing thousands of shares. On Twitter, hashtags began trending, #StandWithDad and #LoveOverGreed. Strangers who had never met William Carter rallied to his defense. "I don't know this man, but he's my hero," one tweet declared. "Greed has limits, love does not." Comment sections overflowed with outrage at the children's betrayal. How could anyone push their own father out of his home? They didn't deserve a single penny. That man's strength gives me hope for humanity. Even local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting segments about William Carter's quiet dignity. Viewers across the state saw his weathered face, heard of his sacrifices, and learned how he chose charity over family greed. To many, he became not just a father betrayed, but a symbol of resilience and principle. The children, meanwhile, could not escape the glare. Wherever they went, eyes followed them with judgment. The eldest son's business partners began to withdraw, wary of his reputation. The daughter's social circle shrank, invitations dried up. The youngest, once boastful among friends, now found himself the butt of cruel jokes. For the first time, they felt what their father had felt: isolation. But theirs was not born of quiet dignity, it was born of public shame. And yet the father himself remained untouched by this storm. He neither sought vengeance nor reveled in vindication. To those who asked for interviews, he politely declined. "I am not a symbol," he would say softly. "I am just a man who wanted peace." But the world had already decided otherwise. In the judgment of the community, William Carter was no longer just an old man cast aside by his children. He was a reminder to everyone watching that love without respect is empty, and that dignity, once defended, can inspire far beyond the walls of a broken home. And as the voices of strangers rose in his defense, he realized something profound. Sometimes, when family fails, humanity steps in. Winter gave way to spring, and with it, William Carter's life began to bloom again, not in riches or family gatherings, but in a mission far greater than himself. The first step was modest: a scholarship fund at the local high school, named after his late wife, Margaret. She had always believed education was the bridge to a better life, and now her name would carry that belief forward. The sight of young students, bright-eyed, nervous, clutching letters that promised them a chance they never thought possible, brought William a warmth deeper than any fortune could offer. Soon the fund grew. His estate, once the focus of greed and betrayal, transformed into classrooms, library books, after-school programs. A small community center bore Margaret's name on its doorway. Their children found a safe place to learn, to play, to dream, while parents, many of them struggling, whispered gratitude for a man they had never met. Neighbors began to speak of William not as the man abandoned by his family, but as the father who had adopted an entire community. Volunteers joined his cause. Teachers sent him letters of thanks. A young boy, the first recipient of the scholarship, hugged him once and said, "I'll make your wife proud, sir." The old man nearly wept. Each day he poured what strength he had left into this work, and though his body grew frailer, his spirit shone brighter, his steps slowed. But his purpose carried him forward. For the first time in years, he woke with joy, not waiting for family dinners that ended in silence, but for the laughter of strangers who had become, in a way, his children too. Meanwhile, his own children, now fractured and isolated, watched from afar. They saw his name praised in the news, his story shared across the country. They saw scholarships awarded, buildings rising, lives changed. And though jealousy still gnawed at them, Even they could not deny that their father had chosen the higher road, but William did not dwell on them anymore. His love, once poured into 3 ungrateful hearts, now rippled outward, touching hundreds. Perhaps he thought this was what love was always meant to be: unconditional, unbound, unstoppable. One evening, as the sun set and golden light poured through the window of the community center, William sat alone by a plaque engraved with his wife's name. His cane rested beside him, his hands folded gently on his lap. "Margaret," he whispered softly, as though she were sitting beside him, "they tried to take everything we built, but look, your name, your dream, it lives on, and it will keep living long after I'm gone." A peaceful smile settled on his face. For the first time, he felt the weight of betrayal truly lift. The inheritance he left behind was no longer measured in dollars or deeds, but in hope, kindness, and opportunity. And as the evening sun bathed him in light, William Carter knew this truth: he had not lost a family, he had gained a legacy. In the end, William Carter taught us something far greater than how to divide an inheritance. He taught us that love cannot be bought, bargained, or measured in silver and stone. True love, especially the love of a parent, is not about what is left behind in a will, but about what is carried forward in the heart. Perhaps his children never understood that. Perhaps many of us forget it too, in our chase for things that shine but do not last. But William's story reminds us, a man's greatest legacy is not the house he built, but the hope he planted in others. Not the money he earned, but the lives he touched. One day all of us will leave something behind. The question is not what, but who we became while we were here. If this story touched you, let it be more than just words on a screen. Share it, carry its lesson into your own family. And if you wish to hear more stories that speak to the fragile, beautiful truth of the human heart, stay with us. Subscribe not just to a channel, but to a journey of stories that remind us who we are and who we might still become. Because in the end, like William Carter, we all want the same thing: not to have the last word, but to leave behind a word worth remembering.